All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, everyone. Thanks for those of you that are here and have joined, and those of you that are watching this live, or if you're watching the recording, we're happy you're here either way. We're going to let the attendees kind of come in and get started. But John, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. It really is. It's a pleasure to be with you always. In the times that we've spoken, I feel like my brain is on overload of all the things that I learn. And so that's one of the best parts about doing these is I learn as well, of course. And we're going to talk a lot about, utilizing Northbeam pretty deeply today. But we're also going to be talking about just kind of the state of where things are in terms of measurement and your take on that and where people get caught up. And so that's really where I think is probably the best place to start. I'm going to check that you can hear me okay with my mic. Is everything sounding good?
Yep, everything's loud and clear. How about myself? Is it coming through okay?
It is good. It is good. Yeah. And what we'll do is we'll go through this, and then we will have some questions at the end too. So if people want to do, want to fire away at questions, we'll sort through those, and we could do it throughout as well. But most likely we'll get through a lot of them more deeply at the end. There's a number of things we're going to cover today. But I'll go ahead and introduce myself and what I do, and then I'm going to have John introduce himself. So my name's Andrew Foxwell. I run Foxwell Digital. We do a ton with digital marketing. We mostly right now, what I am doing is running a community called Foxwell Founders, which is a community for people doing paid social, leading paid social mostly for direct response D2C brands. And then we also just now have launched a Foxwell Founders PPC. So a world that John fits into in terms of the work that he does for people that do that work. So if you want to check out what we do, foxwelldigital.com. And I've been doing digital marketing now. I'm almost 40. So I'm like a grandpa, right? In this space. So John, it's a pleasure to be with you. Why don't you tell everybody kind of what you do and how you got into the place that you are?
Yeah, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm very excited to chat all things kind of deep attribution today. But yeah, so I'm John Moran. I'm one of the co-founders of a Google Ads agency called Solutions 8. We manage a little over $80 million annually in just PPC ad spend with about 200 clients. And so it's in every different industry, both, e-commerce and lead gen. So it's, I never want to say that I'm the smartest man, but I've probably made the most amount of mistakes and learned what not to do the most. So kind of getting into Google's attribution, which is what we'll be talking about today, has been actually really interesting because identifying the overlap with kind of what you've been focusing on a lot, which is social, and how Google also takes so much credit for that as well. Kind of identifying what is the truth is something I'm really excited to kind of get in today and kind of share what we've learned.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's get into this. So I'm going to switch to my view so I can see the speaker. So let's get into this, John, which is where do we stand now in terms of attribution generally, and really in reference to what it has to do with Google Ads? So, we kind of went through the iOS 14 era of that being a place where all of us were trying to find answers. A lot of us turned to third-party tools and to help with that and aid with that. And now where I think we find ourselves is the third-party tools that are out there have grown to be business operating centers for some of us that have started to use it, as well as measuring attribution. And I feel like some of us have a good answer of here's what's happening when you do this. And some of us, it's still murky. And for clients, it's still murky. Meanwhile, the platforms, at least on the meta side, are, on a click basis, becoming more accurate with model data, or with more real data, not as modeled as it once was. So what's your opinion on this now of what the landscape is, and where do people get caught up? Like, what's the common things that you hear that you're like, I want to shout this from the rooftops, like, this is actually what I think?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting with Google is the introduction of Performance Max has thrown a gigantic wrench in all things attribution, because Google moved towards a data-driven model of its own attribution within Google Ads. And then Performance Max opened up, YouTube, GSP, search, shopping, display, discovery, and built-in remarketing that now takes credit for all things new, repeat, and stolen from other channels. So I think that the situation that we're in now is to look less in platform and to look into more detailed analytics inside of third-party attributions, and not necessarily take them as true face value, but track trends. The conversion path length and the conversion path variables, such as like a click on Facebook, a view on Facebook, then a view on YouTube, then a click in Google, and then a sign up for an email, and then 2 weeks later, a conversion. All of those things have to be identified as commonalities for us to really be able to do our jobs well as digital marketers working together with other agencies, or if you're doing everything into one, truly identifying what that top conversion path is. And I think that the conversion path is something that people don't quite look at, and they look at individual channel ROAS, whether it's with inside of Google or Facebook, or with inside of a third-party attribution tool like Northbeam, and sometimes take it for too much face value. Tracking the trends and identifying the conversion paths will then give you more information as to why those metrics look the way they do. The differences between the click and view model, for example, is going to say, hey, a person clicked here, or a person viewed this and then clicked at a potentially different campaign. So understanding just the variances between those two and then tracking those trends is going to be important. So the one thing that I always tell people is look at your overall MER, media efficiency ratio. That is going to tell you the overall efficiency of everything working together. Identify what's working the best, reallocate what is not having an actual impact on your bottom line, and reallocate it to what you can identify working the best, which is those top conversion paths and tracking those trends. When I make one change, how does it overall affect everything? So we have to be better marketers by working together. And we typically won't work with clients if it's like, well, Facebook's doing good, but Google isn't, or vice versa. It's not necessarily the point. We don't want to pin them against each other. The client still wants to show up everywhere, but gets upset when they show up sometimes multiple times each. So we have to really lean into higher amount of brand awareness and attribution on multiple channels, and less into who's doing better, because there's more overlap than anybody knows about.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think to me, what gives me clarity on that answer is I often feel as an advertiser, and we run an agency too, and I often feel like some days I feel like I have the answers really clearly, and some days it feels muddy still, right? And it feels like not muddy, but it feels more just overwhelming, the amount of ways that this can be described. And I think that there's a certain position in the marketplace that puts people on their heels, myself included, which is, look, all of you are doing the wrong thing. You're looking at the wrong thing. You're measuring the wrong thing. And now it's going to continue to be confusing, and that's just what it is, basically. Or there's this other metric that I'm looking at that you don't know about yet. And so I think it's not black and white, like you said. It's not one's doing better, one, like pitting them against each other. It is, and there it's multifaceted, and it's incredibly complex. And especially for brands that are spending even more, the more you spend, the more complex it can be. And I often think sometimes the smaller clients that we have overcomplicate, or the smaller agencies, we overcomplicate it sometimes when we don't need to, right? So there's an inverse relationship in some aspects of it. So I also just want to call out that part about trends, which I think is huge, like looking at it overall in terms of decision making that you have. And then we're going to get into your questions, or some more specific Northbeam centric things here in terms of some things that you like to look at. But how do you right now, when you are looking at trends one versus another, what's the schedule of decision making for you, and how do you like to move clients toward a decision? I mean, there are certainly some things that you look at, I assume, on a daily basis, but I feel like I'm adjusting a lot less than I used to. Is that something you feel as well? And maybe that's ultimately a good thing?
Absolutely. So it's the old adage in Google Ads was, well, I looked in change history and there's been no changes in 30 days. And then sometimes to combat that, it's like we've been getting a 2,500 ROAS on cold traffic for 2 years. I'm not touching this. But yeah, it's definitely the change frequency has declined, but I also think that has to do with skill set. Not necessarily, if you need to make those changes. Someone that can set up something 90% efficiently the first time, but then needs, a month or two to track how efficient that actually is before starting making optimizations is going to be probably better ahead than a person that kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall and then kind of removing what doesn't stick. And so I think that the sort of schedule of decisions that I make is absolutely based off of CAC, MER, and more cold traffic approaches. People are going to decide to buy however they want. We're it's like Genie in Aladdin. We can't control free will. People will do what they please and how they're ready to buy. And there's always some constants that we know that we can track as a static, like how many new customers do we get and at what cost per acquiring a new customer, and then working backwards with some controlled changes, like, well, if we introduced YouTube, I don't care what YouTube says it's doing inside of YouTube or potentially even inside of Northbeam. There's going to be 5 different ways that a person is going to convert after they start seeing YouTube. It's going to be either a direct return search after a click in YouTube. It'll be an organic search. It'll be a brand search. It'll be a sign up for an email newsletter. It'll be an add to cart that gets remarketed via Facebook. It's going to be a myriad of different things. And the longer the path length, the more diluted each one of these channels becomes. But, and I'm so sorry, just give me one quick moment. I'm so sorry about this. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about. I mean, for those of you that are here,
so sorry about that. It's just my daughter and I home, so she just needed something real quick.
It's all good.
But the more that there's the longer path lengths and the more interactivity between the channels, the more diluted that those individual campaigns and individual channels become. But if it's having an overall effect on the top line, all that is really an indication of is that we've added newer channels that are more top of funnel, that are newer cold traffic, and we've seen success overall because those are channels that are doing good on reversion, on Facebook, on Klaviyo, on direct organic, on Google themselves. So measuring that top line is something that people will miss because they're focusing too much on, well, that channel did bad, but it's split 5 ways. So it didn't hit our ROAS goal. So focusing less on ROAS and more on top line will allow you to track trends over a longer period of time, make better decisions, because colder usually means less ROAS, but better overall growth.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just to validate, by the way, I'm also a parent, so I understand this is an okay thing. These are things that take place for those of us that do this career sometimes, that we work at home on Fridays, especially. Mm-hmm. So I do want to jump on one thing that you said, which is interesting. The idea of, I can't not ask this. So looking at I would be interested to look at YouTube as part of this, which is optimize. The title of this webinar is optimizing your paid search with accurate attribution. We're going to get into that. And I'd be curious of what right now, let's just say in the United States, when you're looking at a consumer, that's for most of us, probably we're targeting people that are between, let's say, 25 or 30 and 55 years old. Mm-hmm. Okay. What are the conversion paths? And the next thing we want to get into is talking about the top conversion path between non-brand prospecting and Google brand, which we can go into. But what are the top ones that you see that maybe we wouldn't have necessarily thought, with the help of Northbeam, looking at that?
Absolutely. So YouTube has been one of the primary drivers in a lot of our channels, e-commerce or lead generation. Obviously, with Northbeam, we see more e-commerce. We actually ourselves as an agency, we spent since June of last year about 880,000 on just YouTube. It's been our primary growth channel inside of Google Ads. And so we kind of practice what we preach, and we've started to measure that the correct way, but also deliver that to our clients. But I would actually say for e-commerce specifically, the two main prospecting and cold is standard shopping and YouTube. They're also the ones that get the least amount of attribution inside of Google and inside of Northbeam. Funny enough, because the YouTube campaign, you're going to get about two to three frequency on average. Your engaged users will get sometimes 8 to 10. They'll watch the ads more often. They'll start to engage with it. Your people that skip it drag that down very, very far into, basically no frequency. They didn't watch the ad, they skipped it, which means didn't watch for longer than 10 seconds. And that's when you actually get charged. So when you're looking at the two main channels, the reason why standard shopping, though, is a great prospecting tool is because if you're excluding brand, which is what you should be doing in your standard shopping campaigns, you're only earning one click, and then that channel is gone to that user, essentially. The reason being is that if they click on a shopping ad, they go to your site and they look around and they add something to the cart and they leave, no one's going to say, man, I got to go Google another cold traffic keyword search term again. They're just going to go right back to either direct, or they're going to Google the brand name, and they're going to come in through other channels. So that dilutes the standard shopping campaign. But every single one of those clicks is of a new prospect that is actively looking for you, that has the highest propensity to buy. They just have very, very horrible attribution because email and organic and direct and Facebook and YouTube remarketing, all of that took that piece of that pie, but it started there. So that's where you have to track that overall measurement, because you want that to fail. You don't want that to have a 500 ROAS. That doesn't mean that they're cold. You should be able to 5x them overall with all the other channels in the media mix. But that's the reason why I think that those two are the best for Google Ads, is because it's always cold and it's always high intent.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's go into the first more specific thing, which is you wanting to talk about or show off identifying the top conversion paths between non-brand prospecting channels and Google brand. How do people go about doing this? And if this is a hot tip, what are the ways that they can do this to optimize that paid search?
Absolutely. So I guess what I'll do is I'll share an example of a client and why there is some fallacies built in to, not necessarily fallacies, but I would say some common misconceptions sometimes that people assume when they look at kind of the overview page, because they don't quite understand why. Can you see this okay? Is this screen sharing fine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this here is a current client of ours. And what you'll see here is that the cost of acquiring a new customer is very inexpensive at 30 compared to, let's say, Facebook ads. And the media efficiency ratio is about 100% higher, or 100 percentile points higher than Facebook ads. However, you see most of the spend going to Facebook and less going to Google. Now, a person here would say, aha, well, just scale Google. Makes sense. It performs better, cheaper CACs. We have a very good amount of transactions, 3,000 compared to 8 of the 18. Okay, so why don't we push harder here? And that's because these two are working so closely together that Facebook is a better prospecting channel for this client. It's not always, it's just it is for this client. So when we're looking at the conversion paths, what we're identifying is, well, why does Google look good? But Google always rises and falls. Well, not always, but very closely aligned with Facebook. It always rises and falls with the effectiveness of Facebook. And how are those two helping each other? You kill one, the other dies. And that's true whether you pause Facebook or you pause Google. But if you increase it, the other one also increases. So those trends that I'm talking about can be identified inside of this area here, which is it's called customer paths, but this is basically the conversion path and what a customer has taken. So one of the things that I look at very frequently is the click paths, because it's usually going to be indicative of the view paths as well. If you're getting views that ultimately click, or you're getting clicks that ultimately click, tracking those two trends as to cross-channel attribution is going to help you identify, the reason why Google, any specific channel inside of Google looks good is not actually because of Google. It's also because of another channel, but the overlap, the way that auto targeting works in Performance Max, for example, is simply going to scoop up conversions wherever it can. So we leverage that. One of the ways that I use this here is if you take a campaign by label and you say, we'll track all of these channels here except for Google Ads, which is our brand campaign, and then matched the next path, which is only Google Ads and not the other channels. So you're saying the 34 of the 35 first click, and then what ended up happening to brand, you can identify why a brand or why a remarketing element inside of Google is working well. So this is out of 641,000 in the last 60 days of revenue. So 13,500 sales, fairly consistent. And we can see sorting descending by transactions. This PMax Solate upgraded campaign and the brand are a lot of times the last click in the channel. Now, that's okay. But what is happening first? Well, we can ignore the directs because we do have a lot of return traffic that do get remarketed. That is going to say, okay, so this is not necessarily having a really good result on overall revenue, which is what that overview page was, but potentially earning some attribution by remarketing your existing customers. That's the first thing that we have to understand. That means it's not necessarily scalable because we're just going to start to remarket our existing users harder. If you have a lot of direct that's coming back, we have to look at the splits next. But this here is a really, really good indication. A Advantage Plus shopping and then a PMax click. And those paths are 40 people took that path and 40 people converted. That's 100% conversion rate between those two paths. And there's thousands of paths here that we can analyze, but we're looking for the top. So then we look at, okay, what other commonalities? We see Advantage Plus shopping, we see another PMax. We see Advantage Plus shopping, then we see a brand. We see another Advantage Plus shopping, and we see another brand. So we're starting to track trends. Advantage Plus shopping in Facebook is helping Google. And Google is also helping Advantage Plus shopping. The reason why is because those are two campaigns that are using auto targeting designed to repeat an impression and repeat a click in order to get a conversion together. So if you stop showing up or remarketing single click Advantage Plus shopping campaigns, Advantage Plus starts to hurt. If you stop feeding Performance Max brand new users from a different channel that it can scoop up that easy 10 cent, 20 cents remarketing clicks. If you stop Advantage Plus shopping, Google's going to hurt because we're removing that feeding engine. So identifying those overlaps and not necessarily looking at just the first overview page where I say, well, Google looks better than Facebook, scale Google. The understanding the why is going to be very good because again, this is just the click paths. And you know this better than anybody. People that see things on Facebook 4 or 5 or 6 times, the first thing that they do if they're ready to buy, if they didn't click, is open up a new tab, Google that brand name. That's what people do. So identifying even just singular click points can also be very, very important. And the singular click points here, for example, would be if I'm looking at just overall conversion paths, just out of nowhere, it looks like Google here has more revenue and more transactions than Facebook. But this is the click paths. It's not the view to conversion path. I would say probably 1/3 of the people that are in this first channel here at PMax probably got an impression from Facebook. So, and Northbeam will actually tell you that too. We can see when you change the click and views. Watch this. So we have a $50 CAC on Facebook and a $30 CAC on Google. Change it to click and views, and you'll see here that it's 44-31. So Facebook got a little better, Google got a little worse. So they start to be more closely aligned. And that's when you're seeing that the top line is looking very, very good. We have $31 cost per acquired new customer. We spent $350K on it last week. That's a very good new customer growth. But identifying how they work together, not how they're separate, and using those top conversion paths, you can see, the overlap here is quite often together, only on clicks.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it starts to bring clarity to, instead of looking at it, we know they depend on each other, we're not sure how, which is big. I think, is this something that obviously this is a Northbeam webinar and not trying to hide it, but is this something that someone could do if they didn't have Northbeam, or is this something that really Northbeam allows you to do uniquely? Versus, I mean, obviously you could probably you could get some of this in GA4, if we can find it, or we trust it.
Yeah, if it's not direct and unattributed, the 30% that's left, yeah.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, so the answer is kind of, but this is one of those things where a tool really helps you to start to clarify some of those conversion paths.
It's a validation of your suspicion is what I've been calling it. I've had so many times where I've run a Performance Max campaign and the client's been running a Facebook campaign where all of a sudden I see Performance Max, nothing changed. And all of a sudden, spend stayed about the same. Conversion rates stayed about the same, but all of a sudden my CPC increases, my conversions decrease by 20-25% for no reason. And then when we meet with the client, we say, and I started saying, okay, what were you doing on Facebook? Oh yeah, we paused these 5 campaigns. They didn't look good. Aha. So started to just overall experience by identify what's going on in Google, identify what's going on in Facebook, and then finding that when I started to crank up PMax, my Performance Max didn't actually take much more attribution, but then Facebook started to look better. Sure. So when we used Northbeam, we said, this is it. This is what I figured is overlapping. And then you always get the client where Facebook's like, I made 10 sales. And Google's like, well, I made 10 sales. The client's like, I only made 10 sales. Like, what are you guys talking about? So yeah, those two rise and fall together. And when you see things happening in Google, when you're using automatic targeting like PMax, when things just go haywire, look elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what Northbeam helped you. So
let me ask you about Performance Max. Let's just dive into this a little bit. So one of the things that as a meta forward advertiser myself, I heard recently in the last 30 days, there's been maybe 45 days, there's been a lot of discussion about, oh, you know what? We all knew Performance Max was doing this. We all knew it was, and it was around where it was showing and things like that. You could talk about that. So I would be curious of your opinion of like what PMax is doing now and what controls you can do and how you could utilize potentially a third-party tool to control it a little. One is the first question. The second thing is I just want to state an opinion, which is I'm bullish on Advantage Plus shopping campaigns for Meta for sure, but I'm also a little bit bearish because the more that people have come on to use them, it's just like anything else. It's like, is that inventory and that really good stuff still going to be there? And is it going to be, are we going to learn something about where it's been being displayed that's not actually helpful? Right. It's showing, it's showing in like, some random, I mean, we don't really use the audience network anymore, but like, I wouldn't be surprised for some weird placement it's showing or something like that. So first question on Performance Max, what do you think? What's it doing now? Is it, I mean, we know it's good. I feel like it's still a solid thing for people to be doing, but around the piece that happened, around like, this is where you can now see where it's really showing. Does that affect your spend? And if so, how are you using a Northbeam or really any third-party tool, or how can you think about changing that and having more control as an advertiser?
Absolutely. So Performance Max by itself is a bad idea. Because Google is going to base everything off ROAS. The individual advertiser that doesn't have Northbeam, doesn't think about omnichannel attribution, is going to base primarily everything off of ROAS or CPA. And because it has a mind of its own, it's going to go wherever it would like. And the cheapest traffic that converts most frequently is your brand or your existing customers. It's very inexpensive to show 3 display ads, take a view through credit that data driven is going to apply it to itself, because I showed an ad on the 31st every single month when I know you're going to buy in the next 2 days. So that auto targeting shows amazing return on ad spends, but that auto targeting also really hurts what Google can produce. So I think Performance Max is excellent, but you have to steer it. And it sounds weird, but when I say you have to steer it, you actually have to develop sacrificial campaigns that look terrible in order to push it to the direction that you want it to go. And I've actually used this same tool when I started to, I used to use Northbeam to identify this and then push it in the right direction. And not to, I won't get too far into the weeds, but I'll give you a simple case study off of the same client. And what you'll see here is I'll share with you a time period to when this became extremely clear and has now been a strategy for all of our clients is Performance Max is always going to make itself look good, but it's going to steal from other channels. And if it's going to steal from other channels, why not create our own channel inside of Google for it to steal from? So I know it's going to steal from Facebook because it's brand new cold traffic that has the highest propensity to buy, but so does shopping. So what we did is we actually took sacrificial campaigns in order to make Performance Max do what we wanted. You'll see here since December 28th, and I actually started these things on January 2nd, these standard shopping campaigns. You'd have a heart attack if you would spend 439,000 to make 178 at a 0.41 ROAS on standard shopping. That is a bad idea, but this is done on purpose because these standard shopping campaigns are all non-brand, so they don't have any brand included. And when you look at the actual Performance Max campaign during the same time period, if we look at the overview page here, and it's going to turn it into monthly, so I'm just going to go down to a weekly view here. You'll see this. If you're looking at this daily, why did Performance Max do this? It kept the same spend. Now I'm just going to remove these. The red line is the cost. The blue line is the conversion. So on December 29th, I went from 84 sales to 73 sales to 68 sales to 62 sales. January 2nd, standard shopping campaign launched, 96 sales, 130, 144, all the way out to now it peaked at 232, up from 68 for the same spend. When I look inside of Northbeam, I said, aha, I see what's going on here. I can see what's going on here. When I started my standard shopping campaigns, Performance Max, after the first click, took over. It took over. Now that user has now become Performance Max because Performance Max is now the priority campaign. So we can see here that for 8%, and this is January 3rd to the 9th, the first week after doing this, my first time revenue increased by 44%. And my transactions first time increased by 59%. My cost per acquiring new customer went down 32% because I created my own Facebook cold traffic audiences that I know that Performance Max is going to try to steal from. And I basically created a cold traffic sacrificial campaign that Facebook and steered it in the right direction. So I think that Performance Max is amazing. Standard shopping, I get one expensive non-brand click. Performance Max, I get one very inexpensive standard shopping click, also as many more as I want, and then display, YouTube, GSP, Discover shopping ads with built-in remarketing. So I'm leveraging a feed-only campaign, which is just that specific feed, and then developing sacrificial campaigns to do so. So it's good. You just need to know how to control so it doesn't just fall into 10 new customers, but 100 returning.
Yeah. And so Joey has a question here. Joey asked, I tried one of these side-by-side standard shopping to PMax. PMax started performing better, assuming the strategy of gaining the cold traffic with standard, then closing with PMax. But Northbeam does not show any attribution to standard. I assume if standard got the first click, it should show some in Northbeam, right? If it shows 0, is it doing anything?
This is actually something that Dan playing at Northbeam and myself have been investigating for about the last 2 months. And we have a small hunch, and it's not definitive just yet, but Google about 3 months ago came out and said, hey, everyone, run an experiment. We've given you the ability to run a PMax experiment with one click, and we would like you to compare what Performance Max and standard shopping show. And so what's interesting is Dan and I have been looking through the backend data at Northbeam, meaning weekly, to look at this. And what it looks like is after you earn a standard shopping click, the next click that comes from Google has different information. It has different customer IDs, different G-codes, different IDs, different everything. So my hunch is that Google's stacking the deck against standard shopping because they're going to try to get rid of it, which is moving towards Topics API. But for some reason, whenever we stop our standard shopping campaign and we launch our Performance Max campaigns, you'll see that even inside Northbeam, everything gets exponentially better inside of Google, but top line stays the same. So what we saw is that there's more direct users after a standard shopping click, which is Google it's clearing cache. It's like wiping data. So that's why I always say, look at that top line and look at the performance, because your Northbeam is going to show that Google Ads did a lot better, but typically your top line looks about the same. And especially if you're running those together, you're still getting the same result, but now you can scale. Now you don't have to just over attribute the brand or over attribute the returning traffic. Start to scale standard shopping. Your PMAX will look better, and Northbeam will say about the same thing. But it's simply just Google, kind of playing fast and loose with the caching of these users.
Yeah, Joey says thanks for that answer.
Absolutely.
And Pratik asked, we have marketed branded keyword negative and PMAX using Google Support Help. Will this not help instead of running support campaigns, as you mentioned, like standard?
Be very cautious with that. The reason why when you add a brand negative inside of Performance Max is you actually can sometimes inadvertently cause it to simply just display remarket too much. So PMAX can go on shopping, YouTube, GSP, Discover, it can go everywhere. But if you say, hey, don't allow the branded search to come into this one of 6 channels, Google says, okay, so I'm going to use the 5 other channels to now outbound target those users. And one of the things that you'll see is we've experimented with this a lot, and this is why we created this new strategy, is because you'll see a situation that will look like this. For a quick example, this here is using a feed-only PMAX with the brand excluded. Now, if you look at the last 30 days, for example, you're going to see that I have 37 transactions here. And inside of the listing groups, those last 30 days of those 27 transactions, you're going to see. So let me just grab this column here real quick. These 37, you're going to see it in here. Now, these won't all add up to 37. This is 30. So there's 7 that are happening outside of the PLAs. So this is actually going to be other channels that are bringing those sales. And it actually started to get a little bit worse as we started to scale up. The last 7 days, we have 12, 13, 14 the last 7 days. And we have 15 here. So it's actually now getting 2 more than average. So what we saw is that the Performance Max is actually going to start to use non-feed elements to start to display remarket these users. And then when you look at the back end, most of them are returning. So that's what's really kind of interesting, is that if you're looking at, is feed working well? Yes. But if you exclude the brand, now it says, I don't care if they're new, I don't care if they're returning, and I don't care if they're going to Google it. I'm just going to say these are 12 existing customers, display remarket, and now I earn more credit. So you didn't actually start to drive towards more cold traffic. You just excluded 1 out of 6 channels where Google can start to remarket the existing users.
That's interesting. So, one other thing you wanted to get into was, when using automated targeting, identify how much remarketing and existing customer targeting campaigns are doing, such as Performance Max and Advantage Plus shopping. Can we take what you just talked about and extend that a little bit into that particular point?
Absolutely. So I'll give you another case study. This was, I think, December 28th to January 9th, as I was running a lot of tests back then, and what we've been able to find. So go here. So December 28th, January 9th, I want to share with you a kind of a clear path of what happened here. So we're running Performance Max for this client. I'm just going to use a cache basis and then do this here, new versus returning. When running Performance Max, it will take credit for obviously new and returning, whether you got a click or not. The reason why Performance Max, what we call full build, where you're using all of the assets with your imagery, your video, and your headlines, your descriptions, the reason why Google wants those there, the reason why Google wants videos there. And if you don't add a video, Google will add a video for you. They'll create a video for you without telling you and launch it, because Google's doing something called engaged view conversions. If I can show a video to someone that ends up buying in the next 3 days, PMAX can take credit for it. Again, it could be a return user, and it auto targets so it knows when these people return. So looking here, for example, and I'm going to just grab the platform of Google here. What you'll see is that there's a do first time versus returning. There we go. So you'll see here that we actually took a standard shopping campaign and launched it, and we took a PMAX campaign and paused it. Now, what's interesting about this is you'll see that I spent about 35% less, 40% less. And that's where you're going to see here the spend dip down, because I didn't spend into standard shopping as much as I was spending in Performance Max. So my standard shopping campaign increased. And what you'll see here is that my cost per acquired new customer is fairly high. And I think it was December 28th. It might be a different date range. I don't remember exactly, but we're inside this area here. And because I went to standard shopping, my cost per acquired new customer is now $100 when this used to be around 55. So this actually looked very, very bad. Inside of Google, everything looks like I'm on fire. Like ROAS went from 220 down to 80. CPA went from like 55 to 100. Like everything looks bad. But when you're looking at the back end data, all I did was I essentially took what used to be in Performance Max, which was 47 first-time transactions and 100 returning, and changed it into 40 first-time transactions and 3 returning. So now 100% of my ad spend is going towards new customers and not going to the new and returning, where you can even see after I pulled all the ad spend out, my returning customers got increased.
Right.
And then we look at the top line revenue and say, what happened? Well, I took 40% of my spend out. I only dropped my first time revenue by 21%. My first time transactions only changed 9% after reducing it 40%. But my e-commerce conversion rate first time is now up almost 100%. My MER is up 30. My cost per acquiring new customers down 33%. So top line looks great, but all I did was just not give PMax the ability to take 100 more sales that week that they didn't have to try for to fluff its numbers up.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, there's so much you could say about that, but it's having it be automated, but with it's sort of like cautiously controlled, right? Is I guess like how you could title how you're going about this. I think really what you said to me of Performance Max by itself being a bad idea, and the auto targeting really hurt. You have to kind of steer it properly, I think it underscores to me what the need is still of having a third-party tool for measurement. Like it's one of those things that I like having as much information as possible, but being able to look on a click basis as you steer this, as we go more towards the world of automation, it makes everybody's lives a lot easier, and it's going to give you more control and make you better and make your client results better. There's somebody that asked, I thought PMax would take most of the impressions away from the standard shopping campaigns when bidding on the same products. Is that not the case when you exclude brand from standard shopping?
So that is always the case. And what you have to do is take your standard shopping campaigns, turn them onto manual CPC. Do not use eCPC, and then bid 3 times as much than your Performance Max campaigns. And what this is going to do is cause Google to essentially dip into his greed factor. Google says, okay, I know that Performance Max is going to take priority at $1 a click, but you're willing to spend $200 a day on $5 a click. Here's some information. Here's some data back. And so what you'll see here is it's not always the time. There's a couple small nuances. If there's just so much traffic available that you're not spending on PMax and standard shopping campaigns to capture all of it, it will split. So for a quick example, you'll see here that I have a PMax campaign here that's running this last week with all products available. Like every single one of our SKUs is available. There's 352 and they're all live. And this one here, I'm running a standard shopping campaign for hair care, which is also live. And that when I'm spending this last 7 days, $2,600, I can spend more. And these two are overlapping between those two campaigns. And this is on what you'll see here is a manual CPC without eCPC enabled. And my cost per click in this campaign right now is $4.42, where the PMax is 85 cents. So you purposely make it so expensive that Google says, okay, fine, I'll allow you to run 2. And even if it doesn't fully run and it runs just at a small amount of time, that means that it's trying to go and get that new traffic, but fully can't because PMax is taking over for that new traffic. That's all we want. We don't want them to have to run together. We want them to compete. I don't care that PMax wins. I need PMaxO to look very clean on brand.
Yeah, somebody asked to the last point case study, do you recommend Performance Max and standard shopping run in parallel or only running standard shopping? And if in parallel, do you recommend excluding brand terms from standard, but not from PMax?
Yes. So exclude the brand.
I was thinking the answer to this is yes across the board, right?
Like, yep, exactly.
Okay. And Pratik had another question. And by the way, we only have 15 minutes left of this webinar. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them away now as we get into this. Pratik asked, for cold traffic, Google Shopping or Facebook campaigns, which one is better? My personal feeling is it's not one or the other. It's both, really, right? Like they are, as you kind of said at the beginning, they are complementary to one another. And I think especially to your point with Advantage Plus shopping campaigns, pretty much everybody has access to these now. So that's one thing that I think you want to do them together. Do you concur with that answer or disagree? I mean,
absolutely. You have to test both and then adjust your budgets to what's working better, but you'll be twice as ahead if you were comparing one versus the other.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Getting into another question, one thing I thought was interesting, so Northbeam just rolled out, they now have 1-day benchmarks, which is pretty cool because a lot of us have used Northbeam and we're doing that calculation manually. So they have that. Actually, they just rolled out subscription capabilities too, which is pretty cool. But you have a point about utilizing first click versus clicks only to see where new customer acquisition is starting when running omni-channel accounts. Do you want to talk about how you use that? I thought that was really interesting. We've touched on it a little bit, we touched on some parts of it, but how do you specifically do that?
Yeah. And so what's interesting is because you're going to look at first click, what I like is that clicks are always, those are reliable. Those are very reliable. And it's only because the fact that any third-party data analyzing tool, like an attribution tool, is going to need to redistribute data that it can't see. So what I mean by that is it says, okay, I know I have 50 direct users. We don't exactly know where these people came from. There's just, privacy policy, they had to use app, whatever it may be. We just can't see it. So what any tool will do is take those and model it to what the click data and historical averages and spend amounts have been doing. That's fairly accurate. It's not 100% accurate. Nothing ever will be. But a way to get closer to what's actually happening is looking at those first touch points that are not prospecting heavy channels. Things like inbound, for example, inbound search, inbound shopping. Those things that are identifying where the first touch points are that is cold traffic. So when you're looking at first touch, it allows you to identify the first path of the sequence that you can scale. Very hard to scale the second click. Very impossible to scale the last click. That's why people usually dump a whole bunch in the brand and call it a day and call themselves a good marketer, because they only look at ROAS. Scaling first touch allows you to identify, okay, if this is a inbound campaign, I don't care that they joined email. I don't care that they came back directly, organically, whatever it may be. Got remarketed by Facebook, remarketed by my own YouTube campaign. Doesn't matter. First touch allows you to say, okay, this is where I need to start to push, because regardless of their return path, which is going to be 75 paths long, this is what I can scale. So that's the part that I think is really important. And this is omni-channel. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what platform you're using. When you look at the difference between clicks only, which is linear, essentially, it's going to divide the clicks up by multiple channels. That's okay. But where did they first click? And let me just grab the platform here. There we go. So when you're looking at Google, for example, taking the first time versus returning customers and changing it from clicks only to first touch. I have multiple monitors here, so sometimes I'll put them together and I'll be able to identify the deltas between the two. I'll use first clicks on one view. I'll use clicks only on the other one and see what the differences is. And anything that usually has a lower CAC first time on clicks, you can push there. So for example, this should be pretty simple now to adjust. So the feed only one is getting 26 first touch and 21 clicks only. Okay, so the first touch point that was able to be seen by Northbeam is $5 higher. Good, that's still lower than my average. This is using cold traffic targeting. It's trying to keep my standard shopping, is doing good. So that's where you look at the clicks only versus first touch. Standard shopping, this pillowcase, 78 clicks only. First touch, 80. Okay, this is not always the first path in the sequence. This went higher. So looking at what is the lowest first touch and looking at, is it cold traffic and is it scalable? That's where you reallocate your ad spend. If you're looking at linear, you can't scale linear. Can't scale that. You can only scale where the interest is coming from that you can confirm is non-brand cold traffic. So flip-flopping the two will say, is it good because it's multiple paths? Okay, that's fine. But is it also good on first touch? Good. Now you'll have the first touch, the 7th touch, and then an organic return traffic that was going to convert. Perfect. That's your conversion path that you're starting to push into.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of thing is insane in reference to just having more control. I mean, just like it continues to be what you're talking about, which is just more information. And I mean, if I'm a client, that's incredible information. to know that.
And it goes across all channels. We've worked very closely with all of
Right.
the advertisers inside of businesses. And I'm like, hey, first touch on inbound demand for this is doing good. Take Facebook and start to push. The demand's there. We just need to sync. So it's great.
Yeah. I mean, so taking kind of continuing the idea of control. So you've talked a lot about MER. How do you use MER to track scale for these top of funnel campaigns for like YouTube instead of clicks and views? I mean, because there's obviously inherent loss of attribution in some of those channels.
Yep. And it's also going to kind of cover like two things, I guess I would say. One is MER, but the other one is also going to be specific MER goals or CAC goals or ROAS goals. It doesn't, you'll see that it doesn't matter. And that's what's really interesting is top line is the only thing that matters. This is year-over-year performance for one of our clients. It's the 12th through the 12th. So the last 366 days, I added a day. It's okay. So last year-over-year performance. What you'll see here is that our cost total increased by 22%. Our revenue increased by 37%. So we got 12% better growth year-over-year with 20% growth year-over-year with a 10% less CAC. Facebook stayed the same. Facebook, we didn't add a dime to it. It's the person kind of doing it themselves. They don't really know what they're doing. They're happy with just kind of hanging tight and doing the same thing they've been doing for the last 5 years. And I said, I'm going to go elsewhere. That's fine. So you'll see that Google ads got better. It increased by 20% MER. That's not much of what I was doing. I'm still using Performance Max. I'm still using standard shopping. Like it's been a fairly similar strategy. The only thing that we've actually introduced is YouTube. So you see YouTube went up 1,000% to 36,000 this last year. So $3,000 a month in YouTube. Now it looks like this is failing, right? A 1.57 is way worse than Facebook, way worse than Google, way worse than everything else. But because we're using clicks and views or clicks only, both linear models, this is being heavily reduced because it is saying, hey, they see a YouTube ad and then they go through share a sale because they Google this brand's coupon code. They come in through other, which we can't identify. They join the email list and then they convert. Facebook remarkets them. People started to get picked up on the reversion and then Google ads got better brand and we won. Great. We won. I don't care that this is a 1.57. The client, I love this client. They wouldn't do it. But a client calls me and said, you know what? I don't like YouTube. I'd be like, I'm not doing it. You have to fire me if you want to cancel this. I'm not doing it. So that's what we're looking at top line where everything gets helped. We had 40% new users where Google got less. Google ads had more visitors. We got 40% newer users for 35% more transactions. So the only thing that we did year over year different was add $3,000 a month in YouTube and it helped everything. But it got a 1.57 ROAS. I don't care. That's diluted. It actually probably got a 4, but hit 3 other channels.
Right. Yeah, it's part of the overall path itself. What actually, jumping on another question, what do you think of the degradation of some of these that Google did of some of these attribution windows, basically that they're showing that? Like, what's your opinion on this? I've heard from some people we knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
Other people like we don't know. Some people thought Kirk Williams, went on Twitter and said, look, I can't believe this. How are people not freaking out? But he thought there was going to be more of an uproar. What's your opinion on this? And attribution windows, like how do you think about attribution windows and what people should be looking at for the most part in reference to a lot of this?
I think, and this is going to sound really arrogant, but unless you've been using the model comparison tool, your life doesn't change inside of Google itself specifically. So there is that model comparison tool that Google gave you, and the attribution tool, the attribution window and the attribution assignments, all the modeling isn't for Google. It's only for you. Now we have to pick it back up now in Northbeam, which is I like better because now it's omnichannel attribution. But when you look at the model comparison tool inside of Google, you can see that regardless if it was there or not, you're like, well, what's the first click versus the last click? You don't have to change your attribution tool. This will tell you what it would be if you chose a different attribution model. It doesn't matter to Google. Google knows. Google just says, how would you like to see it for yourself? And we already know that first versus last click, you're going to get, you're going to get more brand because it's the last click. They didn't come there, but they actually came from, search because they find you here and then they could return to the brand. These are all things that a lot of good advertisers know. switching it over to data driven basically says, okay, now what I'll be able to do is actually add in view engage conversions. And I'm like, yeah, I'd like that. I would need that. I prefer that. I'd like to have those view engage conversions that I can also track inside of an attribution tool and see how much overlap is everywhere else. If you're tracking your trends, you're fine. If you've already been using the comparison tool to prove out your theories, you're fine. Google removing it, yeah, it sucks. I've stopped using attribution modeling inside of Google Ads over 2 years ago. So I'm okay, but that's because I've been taking that top conversion path metric. But again, this is a Northbeam webinar, but please get Northbeam. You'll have this times 10 across all channels. It's like, what if you had an attribution tool that not only Google has, but it's like an attribution tool that Google and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and email. We removed it on one small nuance, but you shouldn't have been looking there anyway, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, great opinion. I think that makes a ton of sense. It's more of a thing of like, all these announcements happen and I always have to put it in context, right?
Yep.
It's like, what does it really matter?
Yeah.
I mean, I think so much of it is understanding the way that currently the models are set up is like very basic and also very confusing. And a lot of times people just aren't sure, is everything equal weight? Are they not? And I think the reality of it is what you've talked about today, which is steering things in the right direction and looking at first click, first time customer. That's the scalable stuff. Making sure that you're controlling and not just looking at baseline numbers. Okay, well, let's scale this. Well, that might actually be just hitting the same people more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all of this is leading into some common narratives. So we only have a few minutes left. I'll get to one of the final questions, which is what we just were talking about, identifying new versus returning sales that multi-channels may take credit that has nothing to do with recent marketing. Mm-hmm. This is one thing, the final tip that you wanted to make sure that we talk about with Northbeam. Do you want to get into that one?
Sure. So this is actually also, I guess, a two-part. I won't be too long on this one, but we have a client that sells pet medications, and their pet medications are frequently purchased every month. So when we're looking at any sort of marketing channel, doesn't matter, whatever we're looking at, you're going to have a hyperinflated number. You can't stop it. You upload millions of customers into Google. If Google says 100% match rates, Northbeam still says, yeah, they're still coming in. Like, individual channels are terrible at attributing this. But when you look at the new versus returning compared to the overview, what you're going to find is that things that you thought were true in Google is actually only true in Google because it used to be good. And so what's interesting about that is taking that type of mentality, you can actually start to track year-over-year growth that is exponential because you ignored ROAS and you ignored, combined MER, and you actually started to force spend on what is important. So I'd like to give you a small example because this is a client. This applies to everybody in the e-commerce world that has existing customers that like to buy from them, even if it's through email, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And so when we're looking at this here, I'll give you a quick example. This is a customer here that we spend quite a good amount of money on. This is our last week spend compared to the previous year. So we spent 418 grand last week, made 1.4 million last week. It looks fantastic, like a 3.46, great. And you're still seeing I'm doing the shopping and PMAX, good. Now PMAX is getting 892. Man, that's an amazing MER. It's all non-brand. There's not one brand of search in here. How is that possible? Well, when you separate this out, which you can't do in Google, you're going to see that Performance Max is actually getting you only a 1x on your first-time customers. And it's getting a 7.87 on the returning. Why? Because this is a cash basis. I can see infinite windows. So this last week I spent 46 to make 48. But now I have 361,000 in returning customers that I didn't need to lift a finger for. They just forget to come back anyway. So when we're looking at identifying the new versus sales that channels are taking credit for, when we started using a new model, which is the standard shopping and the Performance Max, we can see here that our new customers started to grow in shopping and our returning transactions stayed about the same. So with 23% less spend, because I was focusing on new customers only, my cost per acquire new customers 41% lower year over year, and I have 31% more new customers. I didn't have to try anything to get those 27 returning. I am going to naturally earn those. I can pause all of my ad spend today and still make $1 million a week. It'll decay over time.
Right.
But that's the part here is I don't care what this happens, but if I can reduce spend, use a better shopping and performance max strategy, and increase my new customer growth 30% year over year while saving $100,000, I have no better case study than that. But don't focus on combined, focus on new. Returning is going to happen if you have a good brand.
I mean, to me, it's I agree with you on all of on what you just said. And I think to me, a lot of the thematic piece of what you're saying as an advertiser is that it's not as simple as spend this, make this. It's what happened the first time? What happened the third time? What was the touch point? What happened when you do PMAX? And what's the relationship to these other channels and YouTube to this other channel? And it's looking at each of these things individually. You know, I think of these little blocks that our daughter has of playing with them. It's like, in order to build the tower, they are different sizes and different colors, but they're interdependent upon each other. And so to look at the overall, to investigate it truly and to build it, you have to have the whole thing.
Right.
And you have to be able to, you have to be able to look at the pieces of those blocks and say, the reason this one was able to fit here is because of this. And maybe puzzle is a better thing. But I think that, you know, you've given a ton of information to people today for, you know, going through the title of this webinar, optimizing paid search with accurate attribution. So I think if there's other questions that people have, John, how do people get a hold of you if they have other questions from this?
My LinkedIn is really good, or yeah, it's like we're on YouTube. I like the comments sometimes. I don't see them all, but LinkedIn is, if you look me up on LinkedIn, I'm always active there. So I usually answer like 15, 20 questions a day. So that's pretty great.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. And if you need anything from me, Andrew at foxwelldigital.com, you can get a hold of me there. But anyway, thank you to Northbeam for doing this. Thank you for your time, John. And I really, really, really look forward to continuing to learn from you as time goes on in this. And yeah, thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.